welcome everybody. Good evening or morning or afternoon or night, depending on where you're connecting from. This is Gabriel Fernandez Borsot. I'm Alef Trust's Applied Program Leader. I manage the overall coordination of all Alef Trust certificate programs. I will next introduce Dr. Glenn Hartelius, but before giving specific details about him, let me start highlighting that Dr. Hartelius is a leading voice in the field of transpersonal psychology, and in my opinion, and of some others, one of the scholars and practitioners that has done more to advance the field during the last decades. Dr. Glenn Hartelius is an award-winning scholar. Last August, he received the prestigious Abraham Maslow Award from the American Psychological Association. He's also a psychology researcher and a leader in the field of transpersonal and integral psychology. Dr. Hartelius is editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies, the largest and most influential scientific journal in the field. He's co-author of the ketamine papers and co-editor of the Wiley-Blackwell Handbook of Transpersonal Psychology, the most comprehensive scholarly overview of the transpersonal field. His experience includes 15 years of teaching at the university level and building and leading a doctoral program in psychology. At the Alef Trust, we are very happy that Glenn has chosen us to launch his course on attention strategies skills for presence, power, and inner voice in life and leadership, a course which results from his cutting-edge research in states of consciousness and embodiment. Next, Glenn will present the course, and after that, there will be time for questions from attendees. Now and during the session, feel free to open your webcams if you want. This way, your experience will be more similar to how the course webinars are. So I now hand over to Glenn Hartelius. We're all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gabriel. So I really began this process of discovery more than 20 years ago. And I did so because because I recognized that in spiritual accounts that I grew up with, that these sort of wondrous events always sort of were associated with a particular person. It wasn't just kind of happening in a void. It was always around a particular person. And I realized that one of the keys to these kinds of shifted relationships with the world was states of consciousness, which is one of the things that drew me to transpersonal psychology. And yet when I tried to understand how to do meditation or manage my states in other ways, I couldn't find anything that really worked for me. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't really grasp how to come to a mastery of my own states of consciousness, both in ordinary and non-ordinary ways. And so, some of the things that I teach now, I actually found began to develop more than 20 years ago, and yet I have waited until now because for me it was not enough to have a process that seemed to be effective for myself, seemed to be effective with clients, but I needed to develop evidence because if I'm going to take people's time and attention, that I actually need to, both for myself and for them, have that clarity of evidence. And so I went back and got a PhD, and after that PhD, I've worked both teaching and publishing, and it took a fair amount of time to find the right people for my team to work with, and we have done that, and I'm happy to share that we have now done something that has not been done before in terms of being able to measure states of consciousness. And I say that sort of being a person who wants to understate and and is always careful about not over-representing. But even with that, I can say that I am so pleased to be at this point to where these processes that have been so helpful for me, we really have solid evidence of how effective they are, and that has really opened new dimensions in research within the study of states of consciousness. And so the course that I'm offering here is an introduction to that work in a substantial and practical way. So it's like breaking it down into simple steps. For me, this is one of the key values, because it's like, okay, fine, somebody can measure states of consciousness, big deal. What is that? What does that do for me? What it does is that it has enabled us to break down the processes into simple steps. Because if you can measure it, it means that you know how to get there. You know how to actually create that states of consciousness. And so these are methods, processes, techniques for getting you from where you are, be able to identify where your state of consciousness is, where your attention is, and how to move it specifically in a precise way to develop the state that you want to enter. So I'm going to share screen here for a few minutes, this is from presented at a conference in Italy a couple of months ago. I'll share with you some of my slides from that presentation. So, as I mentioned, we have demonstrated that it's possible to measure states of consciousness. And here's the important part, that it is authentic to lived experience. It is not simply, oh yeah, we can measure something and reduce it to measurement. It's being able to retain that authenticity to the lived experience. Of course, I've done some fair amount of work in the field of transpersonal psychology, and one of the projects we did was to look at the major themes within the literature of transpersonal psychology. And the theme of states of consciousness was the most common term in the transpersonal literature over 40 years, occurring in about 90% of all articles. So states of consciousness is really the big idea in transpersonal psychology. And it's one of the key elements because one of the ways that transpersonal psychology differs from conventional psychology is that it actually takes consciousness seriously. When you go into psychology literature, essentially, it's about behavior and cognition is more or less considered a form of behavior. So it's all about the externals. The piece that is ignored, the piece that is marginalized, is the lived experience, is what it is like to be a person, the actual experience of being human. And that is where transpersonal psychology has really championed and said, great, behavior, cognition, these are all important, but we really need to study states of consciousness because consciousness is central to our being, and it is central to our healing. It is, great to change your behavior in ways when your behavior isn't working for you. It's great to change your way of thinking, but we need to get into the study and appreciation of the role of the subject, the role of the conscious person who is actually, making those choices about behavior and cognition. And right there at the core of our being, right where we are, right here, is essential to really making meaning in and understanding how to affect processes of healing. So I'll go back to the slides here. And you might say, well, people already measure states of consciousness. They have EEG and fMRI and so on and so forth. And yet, what is being measured is the brain activity of somebody claiming to do a certain thing. What we don't have is we haven't had the language for what's actually happening inside. What is the conscious person experiencing? What pieces of their experience are connected to actually developing that state of consciousness? And so we've invested, decades of research and, hundreds of millions of dollars into developing these wonderful machines that measure brain activity. And these are amazing. But if we don't know what we're measuring, if we don't have language for ways to really understand what the person is doing within their subjective experience, then we don't know whether we're measuring the same thing or we're just measuring different things that people are using the same name for. So two different people might take the same instructions and interpret them quite differently, in part because we use metaphors, we use qualitative language, and sometimes, the behavioral directions, but they're generally fairly vague. So you might have two different people getting the same instruction and understanding them in quite different ways. So we've been talking about consciousness, which is, I had a conversation with Eugene Gendlin once, and I used the word consciousness, and he said, "Oh, that's a really big word. I'm not sure I know what that means." And it can mean many things. So I've focused on using a simpler word, a word that is kind of more approachable, which is attention. And if we look at attention, it's the cognitive process. You're concentrating on one thing in the environment, and you're ignoring everything else. But if we ask a different question, and we ask, where is your attention? In our everyday terms, we are going to understand that question as meaning, what is the attention pointed at? Where am I directing my attention? But of course, that attention also comes from somewhere in the body. And because we are so used to kind of the fact that attention seems to come from the head, we don't even think about this end of the attention. We only think of what is it pointed at. So attention can arise from many different places in the body, and this is a chart in a study that I did with my team. We measured 11 different places that attention could come from. And so this gives you an idea of kind of like the many different ways, the many different kinds of states that we can use. Because what we were able to demonstrate in our study with EEG, we were able to demonstrate that where your attention comes from has a direct effect on your state of consciousness. And we will demonstrate that each one of those attention stances reliably and reproducibly produced a unique pattern of brain activity. So how did we then apply that? So for example, if you take mindfulness, well, we're going to look specifically at Vipassana. There are two states that are traditionally associated with Buddhist mindfulness. One of them is Vipassana and one is Shamatha. And one of the characteristics of both of them actually is that they're associated with strong positive emotions. In traditional terms, that's called bliss. Vipassana is also kind of a global state where your attention is kind of directed in many different ways at once. It's not focused; it's kind of open. It's also been associated with the belly. So what we did is we cross-correlated the brain activity from these different attentional stances with brain activity that has been measured from positive emotions. And we found that only 3 of these 11 were associated with multiple positive emotions. And only one of these fit the traditional description of being kind of an open, diffused attentional state situated in the belly. So in that way, we were actually able to use a scientific method to get to an understanding of this traditional state. Now, our next step, which we're still in the process of, was to do a little pilot study and see, because one of the things that Vipassana does is reduce stress. It's one of the ways of relieving suffering. So just to give you a little bit of context, here are the results of 4 different studies where people did an 8-week mindfulness training. And you can see that they had anywhere from a 20 to 30% reduction in stress. Now, when we did the same thing with we taught people the attentional stance of mindfulness, and what the result was with not 8 weeks of training, not 1 week of training, 30 minutes of instruction. The results were more than 60%. So more than twice as much reduction in perceived stress because we were teaching the direct method, a way for a person to go directly to the stance of mindfulness. Similarly, you can see here after 8 weeks of instruction, in terms of increase in mindful qualities, 15, 20%, something like that. With 30 minutes of instruction, we had people getting 2 to 3 times that amount of mindfulness. Now, one of the differences between ways that meditation, for example, is typically taught and our way of doing it is that if you look at the traditions, the cultures, the societies out of which these practices came, if you were living in Southeast Asia, say 200 years ago, you said, that mindfulness thing, I want to learn that. You wouldn't sign up for a class for an hour and a half on Tuesday night because that wasn't available. What you would do is you would give up your family. You would give up your fields, your business, friends, your community, and you would leave your life. You would relinquish your life and you would go live in a community where that is what everyone did. Meditation during work, during food preparation, during eating, during sessions with the teacher. This was an immersive experience, and however many years you chose to live there, you would be immersed in that and would become a way of being. I'll fast forward to our 21st century lives. Most of us, it isn't really practical to give up our lives and move somewhere and simply immerse ourselves in practice. So what we've done is we have, teachers running class for an hour and a half on Tuesday night, using the same methods that were used in an immersive society, in an immersive community. Now, those methods work well when you are living, eating, breathing, working, immersed in that kind of a transmission, if you will. But we are doing 20 different things every day. And so in order to adapt these practices for the kinds of lives that we live, this development of much more direct practices much more direct instruction. So you know exactly, you can feel inside of yourself, just in the way that you go, oh yeah, I'm going to raise my arm. I'm going to raise my arm. You know, we don't need to do any sort of thing around that. We just go directly to the process. So having that kind of direct access to these states is something that helps us to adapt and to use these skills within the kinds of lives that we live in. Now, the other way that this is a little different is that this is not just about meditation. This is about skills for daily life. Because these same states that can be very useful for reducing stress and increasing mindfulness, and other states, not just the Vipassana shamatha, but other states that become accessible once you learn how to regulate your attentional stance, can help with leadership skills, with life skills, with connection with other people, with, you know, being able to stay with sustained focus for long periods of time, with being able to, for example, get in front of a group of people and hold their attention. All of those are associated with specific attentional stances. And so by learning how to regulate, by learning these direct ways to access different states, it's not just for developing meditative states, it's also for being able to apply these kinds of skills for, you know, things that people consider to be gift. So, for example, I enjoy going occasionally to a concert and just watching how a great performer manages their attention in a way that has impact on the audience. My wife and I went to a concert by Melissa Etheridge some years ago, and we were sitting in the back row near one of the doors, and suddenly I felt like something just plunged me into the core of my being, and my core I just like deepened, and it was just this profound state of consciousness, and which I recognized, but this was such a powerful thing, and it just came all of a sudden, and I was thinking to myself, what is happening? What is going on? Well, is this, you know, just some spontaneous experience? Have I stumbled onto something here? What did I do something? What's happening? And 30 seconds later, the doors behind us opened. Melissa Etheridge walked in and began walking down towards the stage. So here was a performer doing something that I recognized that she probably would have no language for, that had a tremendously powerful impact on the audience, because she went up there and she just, you know, she had the audience in the palm of her hand. And this was from her doing a very specific thing with her internal states. Not only that, but it also demonstrated for me how this impacts the people around us. This is a way that we impact the people around us, whether or not they could see us, because I wasn't aware she was outside the door, and yet this had an immediate impact on me. So these are ways, yes, for our own personal growth and development, for people who want meditative skills, but it's also for changing the way that we have access to high-level skills and changing the way that we impact people around us. So that's a little bit of an introduction. If there are questions, I'd be happy to engage with those now.
Glenn, I'm just intrigued a little as to how much this is understood as something within, you know, as an attention from within, And to what extent it's also more about connecting with a larger consciousness beyond, beyond self, because that's what I pick up with your story there, that there was something you were detecting about someone who's coming into the room.
Well, I think those are not separate, in the sense that how we configure ourselves internally with our attentional stance impacts how much we can connect with something that is wider and larger than we are. Because it's possible to, a couple of years ago, was in Italy with my wife. We were there for an event, and we stopped in Rome and went to the Vatican Museum and walked into St. Peter's, which has this powerful presence, just like a sacred site from any tradition. And watching some people coming in and entering a state of awe, and other people coming in and just chit-chatting and kind of being in their personal media, social media state of mind, right? It's like, oh, let me get a picture of me here, and they are in a sacred, a site that has sacred quality from sort of absorbing the devotion of hundreds and thousands and millions of people over hundreds of years. And one person will be in a state where they connect with that, where they feel that, where they partake and participate in that, where they allow themselves to be immersed in that. And another person will be completely oblivious. They're both in the same presence. One is in a state of mind that can participate, and another is in a state of mind that can just take snapshots to put on their, social media accounts, and they have no idea of what they're missing.
I'm just thinking here also of the power of music, 'cause you talked about music, because on Sunday evening I sang in a choir. We did a Christmas concert, and it was totally magical. We'd done a lot of work, but then the collective, the conductor, the choir, the space, the audience, it all came together to produce something that everybody felt, that was really profound. But there'd been a lot of work to get there. But in that moment, it was just superb.
So I'll give you another example to just kind of add on to your point, and that is that it depends in part on the internal states that the performers are accessing. When the performers are accessing, are really in a state that is connecting, then that's what they can transmit. I was at a Tom Petty concert with my daughter, and he was a great performer. He really had the ability to transmit in a way where everybody felt him. And in the middle of the concert, he stopped and he said, "Okay, now my lead guitarist is gonna do one of his numbers." So Tom Petty stepped aside, joined the Heartbreakers, and just playing the instrument. His lead guitarist stepped up to the microphone, performed one of the songs that he had written. Perfectly good, pop song like Tom Petty's, and there was nothing. Here he was with a completely warmed up audience, an audience that was totally ready to be with him. An incredibly tight band singing his song, and I felt nothing.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to go to the place where he could access those wider energies and transmit them in that relationship with the audience. So you can't say anything about the context that was lacking. Was his state that wasn't there.
Because in performance, you can get in your own way as well, because you can become so nervous or so conscious of what it is you're doing that you don't actually do it very well at all.
Well, that's right.
Being able to control that or know about that would be a great value.
Exactly. So one of the things I do is I do some coaching with, very high level business leaders, people who lead multi-billion-dollar companies, and and they'll often, I have a presentation coming up. Great. Okay. Here's what you do, blah, 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 and what they'll say to me is, oh, yeah, right. This feels familiar to me. This is where I get, it usually takes me a couple minutes to get there after I've started. So they know what that state is like. And when they get the steps on exactly how to do it, how to get into that state before they even step up to the next, then it gives them direct, reliable access, and they don't have to sort of wait for it to click.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that experience with your choir.
Yeah, Glenn, I would like to also share my experience because I've taken some workshop with Glenn, and I found his approach different from what I've tried before, right? And it was very revelatory for me when I understood that same as my physical body is in a certain posture when I do things. And this is very important to how I will perform. My attentional body, my felt sense of the body is also in a certain attentional posture what I do things. And this is so important to how I will do it and how I will relate to the other person that's doing things with me. I'm a psychotherapist, and I've seen this. The quality of presence is anchored in the body. And as you said, Glenn, I did this before, let's say intuitively, right? But now I can master it a bit more. And it's also useful because then I can perceive when it's not a safe space for me, with someone is not good for me, then I can just create a clear boundary and just still be there, not close to, but not be so permeable, not be so influenced. So it's very useful in that way. And I've also discovered that it's very useful as a way to diagnose or even to self-diagnose which attention postures are easy for me. This tells a lot of how I am, which blockages I have in the body, and which blockages I have then in my subjectivity too, right? What I have my difficulties. So I use it with my clients a lot because it's a very soft and respectful way of diagnosing. Okay, it's difficult for you to go through to an attentional posture that includes the throat. Okay, what is that you have with communication, right? It's difficult for you to sit in the heart or to sit in the vital center. For example, it's interesting. I've observed, and this is just an anecdotal observation, not a scientific proof of that. But I've observed that for those people whose more natural center is the vital center down the belly, for that people, they tend to feel like more inadapted to society, more like rebellious, more angry. And I guess that's an interpretation. There is an interpretation for that, right? Is that society normally trains us to be in the head. So if that's your natural posture, let's say, which is let's complete and integral that another posture, but that feels natural to you, then you feel quite adapted, right? But if your natural gravitational center is more down there, and then society is not helping with that, and then I guess it would be natural for you to feel like rebel, like I don't fit here, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that, Glenn?
A couple of things. And one is that there's a number of different studies that have studied people who typically use an attentional location in the heart versus those that typically use it in the head, and they've been able to demonstrate differences in emotional warmth, differences in the way the way they construct themselves, qualities of relationship, differences in approaches to moral decision making, a number of differences that shows that where your habitual stance is actually has wide-ranging impact on personality. The other thing I want to say is that in this process, we not only teach you how to shift into different attentional stances, but also when there are, as you mentioned, Gabriel, some of these blockage areas, how to open some of those up, so that space becomes accessible. And frankly, I found with my individual clients, I find that to be one of the most transformative processes that really makes a difference in a person's internal experience, and sometimes with very long-standing internal challenges that simply begin to melt away when those kind of areas of blockage are open. So there's a great deal. It's like, the felt space of the body is not just like, oh yeah, this is a bunch of subjective. It's very structured as well. So just in the same way that we look at anatomy, maps of anatomy. Oh, there's the heart here, and there's the lungs here, and there's the thyroid up here. In a very similar way, there's different kinds of processes that happen in different areas of this felt space of the body. And when there are sort of blockages in those areas, those processes are impacted. Our ability to have those processes up. One of my clients I was working with the other day was sharing how she was, at a store, and the person who was, helping her pay for her purchase said something that she found offensive, and she said, she just went off, and it was like she was watching herself do this, going, why am I doing this? And unable to stop herself. And I said to her, yeah, that's exactly the experience of having these blockages, because these blockages they usually come from some early trauma or earlier trauma, and that area, that part of the mind, kind of develops its own. Okay, we're going to protect in this particular way, and it's like people say, "Oh, push my buttons." Well, these blockages are the buttons, and when they get pushed, it's like they hijack our system, and all of a sudden we are just responding in a reactionary way, and it's like we're just watching it. So, oh my God, what's happening? And we can't stop it. And so learning how to resolve these obstacles is a really powerful process for personal development. So it isn't just states that we get to, it's also the impact of opening this internal space so that we can get to those states that can be equally powerful. So both of those are, I think, to me, powerful aspects of this approach that really can yield unexpected benefits.
Yeah, Glenn, I think now it's time, because we've been almost 45 minutes, and I think it's now time that you mentioned that you offer a workshop next Sunday. This is a good opportunity for anyone to have a first-hand experience of the method. It's like just 3 hours, right? And it's also time to explain why aren't you offering now a short, taste sample experience of how it is.
Sure.
And
the reason. So, thing is, for me, what is important is that this is really the integrity of the work. So this short workshop is a way to get a taste, but really to get a full taste, because sometimes you do a short process, and there are specific parts that particular people will need. They will have those obstacles, and they need to just kind of get a little bit of feedback in order to guide them. And if you're doing something in 10 minutes, and a third of the people need just a little bit of feedback, and because they don't get that, they don't get the experience, then they miss out on really understanding what the work is. So the 3-hour workshop is really kind of a way to give an authentic taste and to get some feedback so that people can really say, oh, okay, that's really what it's. Now I have a taste, a direct experience, a direct taste of what that process is like. And now I can decide whether that's something I want to do. And furthermore, it's set up so that take the 3-hour workshop, the cost of that workshop is entirely applicable to the longer workshop. So it's really a way if this kind of work speaks to you, if this sounds like something that would be helpful along your path, you're able to get a real taste of it with really no additional cost relative to the longer workshop.
Yeah. And this workshop is happening this Sunday in 5 days from 3 to 6 p.m. UK time. And it has a cost, because I'm representing Alef Trust here, so it has a cost of £200. And if you invest in that workshop and then you decide to register for the whole certificate program, which is 18 weeks long, then you can reuse this £200 for the longer course. And I think it would be a good idea. It's 18 weeks long because first week is just orientation week. How do we work? Get familiar with the system, etc. Then it's 16 weeks of teaching by Glenn, 1 week of holidays for the spring break, right? And Glenn, I think it would be a good idea that you explain the methodology. How is it organized? What are they going to do every week of these 16 weeks, etc.?
Yeah. So every other week there is a module. There is a lecture that kind of presents the concepts and the practices, and then there are individual recordings that show you exactly step by step how to do each one of the practices for that week. Then after you've been able to practice that for a week on your own, we have a live session where students can ask questions, get feedback, get engagement from me, so that you've had an opportunity to go, oh, this part of the practice worked, this part was a challenge, what do I need to do? We can give you the feedback that you need, engage with you in the processes in a way that you can move past those obstacles and go, oh yeah, okay, that's what it is. And then you still have a few more days to practice it and feel a successful accomplishment of that step, and then move on to the next process. So we do this in a step-by-step way so that you have opportunity to master each step, even though they are sort of simple and direct. This is an unfamiliar. We're basically kind of teaching you how to manage a part of yourself that we often were not aware that we could manage. So it's kind of like, it's like on some of the old television sets before they were flat screen. There would be kind of a little hidden panel that you could push, and then it would open, and there would give you the controls box. Right. So this is a way of kind of finding the control box that you may not have known was there, and learning what the different knobs are and how to use it.
Okay. If any of you have any other question.
And I should say that this is, as I indicated before, this is really a product of more than 20 years of both developing these processes, developing the language for them, developing direct and simple ways to teach them, testing them out in academic courses and individual clients, and working to develop something that really provides access to a number of useful, practical, substantive skills that can actually find a difference. And I have to say that one of the reasons, one of the things that gives me, if you will, some expertise in this area is simply the abject failures at trying to learn meditation earlier. It's like there are people who are just naturally good at things, and if you try to ask them to teach you, they say, well, you just do it like this, and because they didn't have to struggle for, months and years to try to figure it out for themselves, they don't have the step-by-step processes. So my early struggles and failures is what required me to both develop a unique process, a process that was something that I could actually learn from, but also a very step-by-step process. Because, it was like when I finally stumbled onto, oh, that's how you do it, and sort of stepped back and watched how I did it. I thought to myself, wow, if somebody had just told me that, I would have been able to do it much more quickly. And from there, it was like, wow, I wonder how many other people struggle with this. It's like I was working with someone once who said he was, mindfulness meditator. So I was wondering, how long have you been meditating? He said, 30 years. Oh, that's great. That must be quite a powerful practice by now. And he this was so remarkable for him. He said, yeah, but it really is hard to shut up your mind, isn't it? And I stopped and I said, well, no, actually it isn't. Let me show you. We just spent 5 minutes. And he said, oh. So, the risk with processes where you're not teaching the skills in a very direct way, and you're just kind of giving kind of indirect cues for what to do, is that people don't always know exactly what to do. And they may spend years practicing, and certainly I am sure that, this gentleman gained a lot of benefit just from the discipline and from the moments when he was able to drop in. But I was just thinking to myself, well, what if he'd had this kind of direct information 30 years ago? He would have been practicing in a way where he really could silence his mind. How much more benefit could that have been? And so if people are going to spend time in practice, to me it seems very important, and to be able to convey those skills in a very specific way. And I should say also that, for those people who are psychotherapists or consultants or coaches, these are also very powerful skills for creating that sense of safe space. It's like, I'm sure some of you have had this experience. I've had experiences where, oh, I need to talk to somebody about this. I have something, there's just something I need someone to hear me. I need some engagement. And call somebody up, hey, let's meet, get there. And it's like, so what do you want to talk about? Oh, you know what? It's okay. It's fine. I'm really fine. Because it's like the receptivity wasn't there. The quality of presence in the connection was not safe, was not inviting. And I've had other times where I had absolutely no intention of saying anything personal, and yet the quality of the space, quality of connection with that person was so safe, so profound, so warm and welcoming that it just came out.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the key to these kinds of interpersonal skills, is to be able to co-create that safe space with the person. That's one of the things that we were covering in this, is like exactly how to do that. So for example, it's like here again, someone who's been a psychotherapist for 15 years probably will find that happens often. But what if somebody's, a recent graduate who's just been doing it for a few years, and it's like, yeah, it's working all right, but they really haven't been taught as part of their education. They really haven't been taught how do you co-create that safe space, and for good reason, because nobody's actually had the language. What we've done is we've developed the language, we've developed the direct, step-by-step way to develop that skill. And so, that's, again, just one of the other applications. And for me, that ability to create safe space with another person is, it's maybe about half of psychotherapy and coaching. Because, people say, well, your client will often, find the answers for themselves. But if they're not feeling heard, if they're not feeling safe, if you're not working with them to create that sense of shared presence, not merged presence, but shared presence, safe presence, they won't necessarily be able to find what's authentically true to express it and find their way to their own answers. When you do create that kind of space with them, that's what opens the gates for those self-realizations, because they really experience themselves. Someone else is really present with them, fully present with them, so that whatever comes up for them emotionally, whatever they need to share, it's safe. And so that creates that kind of context for healing.
Then, can I just ask, you're painting a picture of a very practical course.
Yes.
To what is there any sort of theoretical or academic element to it, or is it sort of 80-90% practical?
No, it's both.
Okay.
Because for me, so for example, with the approaches that I use for meditation, for me, it's not about leaving the intellect behind. We're not in that kind of society.
Mm-hmm.
It's about using the intellectual mind as an ally,
okay,
to enter these other states. And to me, it is also important to present the scientific evidence, because it's like that's what our societies ask for, and so it's important for us to honor that as well. And as I said, it's been critical for me to be able to actually have direct evidence before I embark on kind of a more public presentation of this work.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that will be included.
Thank you.
For some people, that will be more peripheral. For some people, that will be more central. This way, it's both aspects are there for people to focus on the portions that are priority for them.
It does sound very inviting.
Okay, before we close the session, I would like to share in the chat two links. This first link goes to the page in our website, which contains more information about the 3-hour workshop that we're having this next Sunday, and it has the modules, the contents, a much more detailed description. So maybe you can save this URL for a deeper examination later, right? And the second link that I'm sharing right now is to a page that is describing this 18 weeks course with all the modules and all the contents and the method, etc. So I would suggest you better save these links for future examination. And yes, we have reached the hour, so I think it's good time for us to close the sessions. Thanks for being here, and thanks to those who are watching the recording. If there is not any last minute question, you still have time to ask. We will close the sessions. Any last question? No? Okay. So thank you very much. We'll close the session now.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, both of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.